So guest 3308, who is it? Who have I got there then? Could you just type your name in so that I know who, what what you are, what your name is? Ah, Charlotte. Hello, Charlotte. Oh dear. Okay, so I've got Charlotte and I've got Hayley. Okay, well, I think we've given it everyone 5 minutes to join us, so it may mean that obviously we're not going to get any more, but if people do join, then we'll have to catch up. So I hope you can both hear me still. It's a shame I can't hear you because obviously much better if we can have a dialogue instead of me just talking. But I will try and perhaps use the chat facility at the end for some questions and answers. But I'll just run through the presentation, and like I say, we can perhaps try and do something at the end to get some input from you. Okay, so welcome to the virtual classroom. It's all a bit experimental, and I'm pleased actually it seems to be working quite well. At least my bit of it is. So we'll get going. Okay, now press the right button. So hold on. Okay, so what I thought I'd do is I thought I'd use this virtual classroom as a way to talk a little bit more about risk management in drug development, more than you've had in the course materials so far, because you know, it's an interesting area, or it's certainly a developing area, even if you don't think it's very interesting. Risk management's been around, I mean, it's been around for years, and it's widely used in a lot of industries. The food industry, even devices have got a lot of risk management in them. But we've sort of escaped in drug development and sort of clinical research for quite a long time. Now, when it first appeared, the idea of risk management first started to appear in the regulations or the guidance when the ICH issued a quality risk management guideline. That was in November 2005. And that was very much focused on the quality of the pharmaceutical product. So very much around good manufacturing practice, that sort of thing. A bit later on, so 3 years later, they brought in another guideline about a pharmaceutical quality system. So this is all very much with fully integrated risk management running right the way through the management of pharmaceutical drug development. So that was all nicely contained in the sort of GMP area. But over the years, since then, we've seen more and more of those sort of general risk management principles and processes and tools are being applied more widely throughout drug development and more widely throughout sort of clinical research. So even in trials that aren't with perhaps new drugs in development. So it's definitely coming, and we're seeing more and more of it all the time. Now, back in 2009, this was published. It's called an international standard for risk management, and it's a standard that applies to everyone. It just brings together the general principles, some of the terminology, and general guidance, and it's very much underpins a lot of the sort of risk management that we're working with in the industry and beyond. So it's an important document. It does sort of guide how we talk about risk management. So I've just put it there so that you know of it. You can download it, and you can buy it, but it does cost about £60. So I've yet to find anyone who's been keen to do that. But it doesn't matter, because all the principles are filtered through all the documents you're likely to see. So, but just to be aware of it. So some of the risk management concepts are already trickling in, as I said, and certainly we'll see more of it with the ICH GCP guideline update that refers to some risk management concepts, and also the European regulation, which is currently being implemented at the moment. So both of those start to talk about risk management. So it's a good, it's definitely with us, and it's a good thing to sort of have an understanding of. Okay, so next slide. So one area that we've already seen it in is with the MHRA, so that's the Medicines for Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency here in the UK. They've actually started to look at interventions in terms of their risk. So they now would classify clinical trials or study interventions in terms of their risk of A, B or C. So the risk of type A type intervention is it doesn't pose any more risk than standard care. Type B is somewhat higher than standard care, and type C is markedly higher than standard care. And it just allows a proportionate approach to the level of risk. I think when we first started having inspections, and we first started seeing a bit more of the MHRA, the approach was standard across the board, and it was really sometimes inappropriate for the level of risk that was being presented. So this is a step forward, definitely trying to be proportionate to the risk that's of the trial that you're dealing with. So that certainly helped a bit in terms of inspections. Now there's obviously some relationship also. We can have risk that the amount of monitoring that we have to do can be decided proportionate to the risk of the intervention. So low risk studies need less intensive monitoring than high risk studies. So that's been a useful development. So that's with us at the moment. I just flagged that up, and that's certainly a risk management approach. So just to pull back a bit, I wanted to look a little bit about some of the general principles of risk management. So these apply everywhere, not just in clinical research, but I've looked at them with that in mind. So 4 key types of risk. The first one is called hazard risk, which you're going to be very familiar with. That's obviously if we harm a patient, that would be a hazard risk. The risk to members of the research team themselves or to the organisation that can be reputation risk. So if the organisation is harmed, that's also would be a hazard risk. So those are the things we actively work to manage. So we'll look at that in a little while. There's also such a thing called an uncertainty risk, and if you're running research projects, you all know and understand that however well you plan them, however buttoned down you have everything, you can never be sure what might pop up, how things are actually going to pan out. So what's happening there is that you've done your best, but there's a level of uncertainty whenever you run a project, and part of what you're doing is obviously working with that uncertainty and managing it, and obviously coping with it within particular parameters, and keeping things on track as well as is needed. and just managing and controlling that uncertainty. But obviously the uncertainty presents a risk, and that's certainly something risk management helps us to deal with. The third risk there is called an opportunity risk, and it's in fact that's how we achieve the benefits of a project. Just imagine that a company have decided to are making up their mind about whether they want to start to develop a new drug. And they have to make a very careful and considered decision there as to whether they will expose the company or organisation to the risks that will inevitably present. So these opportunity risks are positive. You can't achieve the benefits unless you expose yourself to them. But again, it's a risk, and you have to be ready to deal with that. So it's part of a strategic plan, and it's definitely a risk. Oh, that's my daughter coming back from school. She doesn't know I'm here. Okay, hang on, Amy. I'm just on a virtual classroom at the moment. Sorry about that. And then the fourth risk is, of course, one I'm sure you're all very familiar with. I certainly am. Is the idea of a compliance risk. So that's where we deviate from the regulations in a minor way or a major way, or if it's terrible, then obviously we could have a serious breach, which in clinical research is the most serious situation. So this would be where the deviation actually led to patient harm, significant, absolute patient harm, or it has significantly impacted the quality of the data. So those are certainly serious breaches. So that would be the four types of risk, and we do deal with all of those in clinical research in different ways. So we need to have a grip on all of those. Okay, so press the wrong button. So the next slide. So this is actually taken out of the that ISO, that international standard, as a standard way of managing risk. So you would certainly think very carefully about the risks that your situation is you're operating in, and say before a clinical trial, what you might do is sit down and have a long, hard think about all the risks that you think might occur in the trial. And you can sit down and absolutely brainstorm, perhaps drawing from previous experience, thinking right through as to what might go wrong. You can then clearly identify what the risk is that you're talking about, and that's sort of sometimes harder than you think. You can have a general idea about a problem, but you want to really be clear about what is the risk you're talking about, and then you want to analyze that risk. We'll have a look in a second at how you might do that and evaluate it. So that might be deciding on how serious it is. We'll have a look at that in a second as well, the sort of frequency of it and the impact of it, what the consequences might be. So that's really getting an understanding of, do I need to do something about this? And then obviously if a risk occurs, then you've got to have a plan for how you manage it. So that obviously that is the flow of risk assessment. On the right hand side, risks need to be monitored and reviewed, and on the left hand side, of course, we need to have a good communication plan, otherwise it just stays with a few people and it doesn't get communicated to all the other people who might need to know and understand. So communication is very important. So that's the basic flow of risk management, those aspects. Now, I said earlier we'd have a little look at how you might evaluate a risk. So this is looking at, there are two components of a risk. There are probably several others, but these are the two key components of a risk. You have the likelihood of the risk happening, how likely is that risk to happen, and that's running along the horizontal there. And you also have what the impact of that would be on the organisation, on the trial, or whatever you're thinking about. So you end up with this nice quadrant. And if we look at the low impact, low likelihood risks, are risks that are not very likely to happen, and they're not going to have very much effect either. So those risks, you might say, okay, I know they're out there. I'm going to just tolerate those. I will track them. I do want to know about them. I want to be aware of them because they may they may become more problematic. Because if they start to become more frequent, or the consequences of them may be unexpectedly worse than you were initially thinking, then you may need to do something more than just put up with them. But in the first instance, you might actively say, okay, well, those things will happen, and I'm just going to sort of put up with it for a bit, see how things go. Then we might have the low frequency but high impact risks. So, for instance, one example might be the possibility of having a very serious SUSAR, so serious unexpected adverse drug reaction that leads to the patient demanding compensation. So I'm thinking of, for example, the sorts of things that happened with Northwick Park with that phase 1 study back in 2005. You may not remember it. It's a while ago now, actually. It's a long time, but that was a terrible situation in that a phase 1 study was conducted with a monoclonal antibody, and the patients were dosed. 6 healthy volunteers were dosed, and of the 4 who received active treatment, all of them had a very severe adverse and acute adverse reaction to the drug, and they wound up with lasting damage. They 2 of them went into, well, I think all of them went into end organ failure. The situation was recovered and they all survived, but 2 certainly have lost fingers and toes, and as a result that's led to a compensation claim inevitably. And in that situation, companies usually take out insurance to cover them, because these insurance claims can obviously run into millions. So in that situation, what they've done, in order to manage that risk, they would take out insurance. So that's a way of transferring the risk to another party. So they pay an insurance premium and the insurance payout for the compensation. Okay, so that's an example of transfer. But another example of transfer, which happens a lot in pharmaceutical studies, is that the sponsor company may outsource to a contract research organisation or clinical research organisation to run aspects of the study. So that's another way of transferring out risk to some extent. So they can't completely transfer it out. They never can completely be free of risk, but they are sharing the risk with another party. So they've transferred some of the risk out. So that would be those sort of those risks in the sort of left-hand side of the diagram. Then you've got over to the right, the ones that are more frequent. So they happen are likely to happen. We know they're likely to happen. The ones that are low impact, you would perhaps be picking up and making sure that they're controlled. And so you might accept they're going to happen and then put in measures to control this. Honestly. Right. So that would be putting in corrective measures. Then if you've got a risk that is high impact and likely to happen, then those are the ones that are most problematic for your project. If you're working what those are out at the beginning, you need to be really thinking about how you can prevent these happening so that they don't happen. That would be the best thing. You absolutely want to make sure they don't happen. And that's often things that we put into protocols. So we'll be thinking about what we put into a protocol to absolutely make sure a particular hazard risk doesn't happen. So in terms of patient safety, you often, for instance, would have exclusion criteria about particular types of patients who aren't going to be suitable for receiving this drug in the early stages of development when you don't know very much about it. So you often would find that there are, could you answer it? There are often excluding patients who've got liver failure or patients who've got kidney failure, that sort of thing. So that's a preventative measure to make sure risk doesn't occur. So those are the sorts of, so what you can do at the beginning is obviously you can look at your risks and you can start to put them on this map and give yourself an idea about where the risks are, and then obviously start thinking about how you might manage them. So it's quite useful. So that would be risk mapping. Another way of presenting risk, which is quite an interesting idea, and certainly when you're thinking things through, it's quite a helpful way of thinking about them, is to look at this sort of bow tie thing, because often it's quite easy to think about the risk being the impact, so the event that might happen, but you've got to sort of then look back as what was the source of that, what was the root cause of that event. That's often what we have to try and work out. So an event's happened, we've got to really think through about, well, why did this happen? And then sometimes you sort of dig around a bit more and think, oh, it's not as simple as that. It's a slightly more complex situation. There's more than one source, or two sources are interacting together, that sort of thing. We'll have a look at an example in a minute. So it's good to think about what the sources are. And then obviously on the other side, you're thinking about what the consequences of that event might be. So, and then, you know, you need to sort of think through on those. So, so if you are trying to prevent an event happening, then obviously what you're doing is putting in preventative measures. And if you're dealing with the event, and you're putting in corrective measures. So that's prevention and correction. Now, I don't know how many of you might have heard of such things as CAPAs. Could you just flag up to see, let me know whether you've heard of those? No, okay. So these are called, oh, no, neither of you. Okay. So this is actually definitely something that's come out of the quality ICH quality documents. As I say, first came in to the pharmaceutical quality side, but we're seeing it in drug industry in every other area. It's penetrating across research. So what happens is, for example, there may be an audit or something may come to light where there's been an event, a deviation, something could be just a deviation from an SOP, could be a deviation from a protocol. It could be much more serious than that. So anyway, there's been some sort of event, and what then happens is a team will get together, or you know, one person, but basically what will happen is someone will put together what's called a corrective action, a preventative action plan. So they will have a good long think about all the things that they might do to prevent this happening, and all the things they might do to correct it. Correct it initially, obviously, that's the first thing you do. You want to put whatever was wrong right, but it's important to think, okay, so that event did happen. Does this mean we've got a systematic problem? It's one thing to put that right, but have we got a wider problem than that? Do we need to look at putting in measures to prevent that happening? So you might have to look back at your processes and have another think about how you do things. Maybe it's about training a group of people, perhaps they've not quite understood. Maybe there's been some misunderstanding to prevent that happening again. So, and what you would do is you put together what's called a corrective action, preventative action plan. So that's shortened to CAPA. And then you will systematically work through all those steps to make sure each has been addressed. And certainly the next time you're audited, that will be something the auditors will want to see, that whole CAPA process has been done properly. So that's certainly a feature that we're seeing in industry coming in. So the idea of these CAPAs. So they're with us for a while, I think. So I've just put something together. This is actually a hazard. This is a safety hazard, obviously. This is one of these hazard risks. that we might find on a clinical trial. To just illustrate a point, this is a bow tie. So we've had a patient, osteoarthritis patient, in a clinical trial of a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory who's been admitted with a perforated gastric ulcer. Okay, so, oh, I hope this works. Oh God, that's a point. Okay, let's see. Oh, yes, it does. Oh, it's all gone in one go. Okay, there you go. Right, so I'm finding out that my, oh, hello. I'm finding out that my PowerPoint's, whoa. Oh no, don't tell me if I've got to go back. Oh yes, it does. Okay, I'm just finding my way with this a bit. Apologies. Right, so okay, we know we've got a patient in a osteoarthritis study taking a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, and they develop a perforated gastric ulcer. Now we know already that taking non-steroidal anti-inflammatories is associated with gastrointestinal side effects. So we're aware of that. But of course, we would need to find out a lot more about what has happened with this event. So we would go and talk to, I mean, the investigator would go and talk to the patient perhaps and other researchers, and basically really drill down to what really happened. What was the context? What happened? And run through all that was going on. So what happens in the conversation when he talks to the patient, and in fact when they look at the medication, it comes to light that the patient used a bit too much. They was taking a non-steroidal, so that's, clearly they were taking the active treatment, not the placebo or alternative. They were taking the active, but they were overusing it. They took a bit more than they should have. They weren't getting the pain control that they wanted, and so they took a few more tablets. And they weren't entirely clear whether that was allowed or not. So they weren't sure if they were allowed to take a few more or not, and they wound up overusing it. So it wasn't just simply the NSAID causing an expected adverse event. There was also an element of the patient overusing and some patient confusion, all of which contributed to the adverse event. So thinking about the consequences, obviously there are consequences to the patient. They're in a bit of a, they hopefully are going to be managed well, but that they are experiencing what could potentially be a life-threatening health situation. So that's not nice for them. But there are some other consequences. Possibly they could present a compensation claim. They're probably entitled to do so. They may lose many weeks off work as a result of this, and all that sort of thing. It's possible they could present the company with some adverse publicity. I mean, these days with social media, that can happen very easily, can't it? I mean, historically, it might not be very easy for a patient to get adverse publicity out there, but these days they just have to go on Twitter and Facebook, and the company's reputation is in danger. Obviously, one perforated gastric ulcer might not ruin the chances of this non-steroidal reaching the market, but obviously if it were something that happened too often, that would certainly have an adverse effect on how the regulators viewed that particular product. So there are those consequences as well. So in this situation, you have to think about a few things that could have prevented it happening. You want to sort of think about, well, okay, this happened. How could we have prevented it? Well, we already put in regular AE monitoring, but certainly that is why it's in there, to make sure adverse events are picked up. I mean, this sort of thing, can suddenly pop out, but it could be that this patient had actually been complaining about gastric pain, indigestion, that sort of thing for a while, which would have sort of rung some alarm bells, you'd hope. But so obviously we monitor all our AEs, and one of the risk considerations you do at the beginning is obviously look at the regular adverse events associated with that particular drug and how they're going to be monitored. And again, that might go into the protocol. So for example, if you know that you've got particularly with cancer treatments, you may well know that this particular drug may well cause anemia, may well cause neutropenia. So you would be taking regular blood samples in order to track that. For an AE, for a gastric ulcer, it's possible you could do intermittent hemocults to see if there's any problem. I've occasionally seen that done. Now, the other parts would be obviously the patient wound up overusing their drug. They just sort of took a few more out of the pot. We It was picked up, but obviously after the event. So and they confessed to feeling a bit confused about whether they were allowed to take any more. So certainly things like the packaging itself can help you prevent a problem like this, because things like blister packing or some similar sort of packaging can just help people, the patient, be much more aware about what they should be taking, and making it a bit more difficult to take more tablets than they should. If, for instance, they should be taking it twice a day, you have an AM and a PM, that sort of thing, so that they're quite clear. The instructions to the patient should be very clear. They should have something written so that they're very clear about what they should be taking, and also how they manage if they miss a dose. It may be that mostly I've seen that if a patient misses a dose, then the advice is usually not to double up when they do notice, because obviously they're taking twice the dose, which again might push them into having an adverse event that they might not have otherwise. So those are all sort of ideas for preventive measures. They're not the only ones, I'm sure. You can think of lots, but those are the idea of preventing something like that happening in the first place. And then, of course, we've got the events happen. So clearly, it needs to be managed. The patient's hospitalised and managed, and their medical care is looked after. Obviously, the thing to do is to stop taking the NSAID treatment, because clearly that was part of the problem. That was instrumental in causing the problem. Then there's the whole idea about, okay, so we've managed the patient's okay, but there's these other wider problems, in so much as, okay, so that happened, we can't just sweep it under the carpet. It's actually got to be thought through. So this is a type of data that you would send off to a data monitoring committee, and they'd be looking to see about whether these events are turning up more often than they're happy with. They will have some sort of parameters that they will be happy to work within. If it happens just once or twice, but once it's happened more than that, then they might say, okay, that our criteria was we'd accept it happening 3 times, but if it's happened more than that, then we need to have a really long think about this. And so they're made aware of it, and then this event will appear in all the reports and communications in terms of the clinical study report and everything, so it's not buried and lost forever. So the regulators eventually will see this as well. So that's all some ideas about corrective measures and preventative measures for a hazard risk. There were other sorts of risk, and I've just given an example here of this is a snapshot out of a risk management plan where they're looking more at the what do we call that risk? The uncertainty risk. Okay, so this is very much a risk management plan looking at the uncertainty risks associated with a clinical trial. So in this particular plan, as you see, they've described the risk and put it in a particular category. They've got the severity, which is the same as saying the impact, and they've got the probability, which is the same as saying the possibility of it happening. And they've given it low, medium and high, and have used a sort of traffic light system. So very clearly that the red ones make you jump out at you, don't they? You've clearly got to do something about these. So they then have a strategy written over, and risk mitigation, which is the same as sort of saying risk management. So this is a way to minimize the impact of that particular risk. And as you see, they've got a strategy for each of these. They've had a long, hard think at the beginning about the sorts of things that might pop up in a trial, and they have a strategy in place should it pop up. Now, this risk management plan is something you would put together at the beginning but it's not something you put together at the beginning, dust off, and put to the top of the cupboard and never get out again. I mean, it's something you need to be revisiting all the time. It's a living document. I mean, some clinical studies these days actually have a risk management manager instead of a risk manager. So instead of a project manager, they have a risk manager whose focus is entirely on monitoring and tracking the risks and dealing with them and improving the processes that so looking at a risk as deciding whether it's a sort of an isolated event or whether it's indicating a more systemic problem, in which case requiring a change in the way processes are done or people are trained, that sort of thing. So looking to make sure it doesn't happen again. So, and the idea of improving, continuous improvement to processes. So flagging up that something hasn't gone well, and we're putting in place ways to improve things. So that's all very much part of this concept of quality risk management. So the idea being all the time you're improving quality. Now these risk management plans are excellent way of capturing the tacit knowledge of the project. I don't know about you, but certainly a lot of the projects I've worked on, they run over many years, and in fact the personnel can change completely in that time, the people in the company, but also the people at the sites. And sometimes you lose some important knowledge and know-how, and this sort of risk management plan is a way of capturing that, because people would have had to think through about how to tackle something and record it, and then later on it can be reviewed, and it can certainly be instrumental in helping the next team come through and make their plans for the next trial. So it's a really good source of very important learnings from a study, so very important. And the idea of this whole thing is that managing risk, although there may be a risk manager, it's actually everybody's job. Everybody in an organisation should have it in their mind, keeping on top of it, and so it's absolutely integrated right through the organisation. And that's certainly within the industry, that is certainly the drive that we're getting, having come up through these ICH GCP guidelines. So we're seeing it a lot more. Sometimes what happens in the industry takes a while to go beyond the industry, but I wouldn't be surprised if some of it starts to sort of perpetrate out beyond us. And certainly you might find that when you're working with the monitors, and you might, they may be exploring a particular event in minute detail, and you'll be thinking, why on earth are they doing this? They're driving me nuts. And what will perhaps be behind this is the need to collect, they're executing this sort of risk management in order to fulfill the requirements of some sort of CAPA, and so it all seems to sort of take on a life of its own. So that can sometimes impact, obviously, site personnel as well, because you may be having to sort of pull out information and really drill down into things to find out what the sort of basic problems were, the source of the problem. So that was just a quick overview of risk management. So I wasn't going to go into a lot more detail than that. Is this all new to you? Perhaps you just let me know. Yeah. No, so you, Charlotte, you've actually come across it before. Just type down quickly what what your involvement was. How did you come across it? Oh, Charlotte's gone to sleep. Oh, Charlotte, wasn't it? Yeah. Oh, she's typing. Oh, I didn't say yes. So you haven't come across it before, is that right? This is the idea of risk management is new to you, or it's not new, it's familiar to you. Yes, I mean, I think as yes, I think so. It is something you hear, and I think it's actually um, people started talking about it, and then I just feel that people have never really had a chance to be taken through it. So um, I think it's quite important to have a little bit of insight into how to set about looking at doing the analysis, doing the evaluation, and thinking through strategies. So something I do as a research nurse with all my patients, yes. So well, that's right. If you're treating, managing patients, then risk management certainly comes into making sure patients aren't exposed to any more risk than they have to. So yeah, absolutely. So you're dealing a lot with hazard risk, aren't you, I guess? So making sure the patients are safe. Yeah, so certainly from that point of view, and there's all the things that data protection, making sure their records remain confidential, their identities aren't revealed, that privacy is maintained. So those are important aspects as well. Yeah, absolutely. So that would be certainly a control measure, isn't it? So eventually, that's stopping the treatment is one way of removing the risk. So that would be appropriate. I mean, I expect you're doing it all the time, I think. I mean, you will be doing it all the time without even realizing it. So um, it is just a question of stepping back and thinking, formalizing it a little bit. Um, so I think it's just a good thing to sort of have some awareness of. And I think certainly it's interesting because I think I can remember when I first started monitoring. Monitoring, of course, is a when your CRAs come to monitor you, they're obviously picking up on whether any of these events are happening as well. So that's a quality assurance process. And just thinking about context, because I remember going up to one of my first clinical trials was in heart failure, and I was doing this study all over the country, and it was very interesting because I'd go up. I went up to see one site, and when I was looking through the notes, I noticed none of the number of patients that had heart attacks or ventricular tachycardia, all sorts of things were going on, but they hadn't reported them as serious adverse events. And when I asked them why they hadn't, their view was that this is the sort of thing that happens with these patients, and so from their point of view, this wasn't an event. And whereas if I talked to somebody who was doing a study in something more ordinary, osteoarthritis, of course, they would immediately be reporting lots of all these serious adverse events. So it's very much about, they were very, the people working with these very sick patients with heart failure were seeing it, the context very differently from someone who would be working in a less less critical situations. So, you know, the context is quite important. Okay, I think nurses, we think about patient safety most and forget about the other risks, which monitors will think about. Yeah, absolutely. So they're looking at it from the point of view, from the uncertainties point of view, and from the in terms of the compliance. So that's the area of that you, as you say, you might not automatically be thinking about. So there's several layers of risk, all of which need to be addressed. But the important thing is obviously the hazard risk, which you, I'm sure, have all got well under control. Okay, so has anyone got any questions? Okay, good. Hayley? Good. Okay. Well, it would have been nice to speak to you. It's a shame the microphones weren't working. It makes it much more dynamic. But I hope, well, at least you participated, so I hope that was worthwhile. And I look forward to seeing your risks written down on in the activity. I think there's quite a few up there already. So perhaps having had a little run through, you now know a little bit more about how to present it. Okay. So thank you for participating. Bye bye.